The thunder cracked overhead as Violet Warren huddled against the wall of her small bedroom, listening to her husband's boots scraping across the wooden floorboards downstairs. The Terlingua, Texas homestead that had once represented her dreams of a happy marriage now felt like a prison, its adobe walls holding her captive as surely as any jail cell would have done. She pressed a cool cloth to her swollen cheek, wincing at the pain that radiated across her face, another reminder of Harold Warren's unpredictable rage. It was 1885, and Violet was 23 years old, trapped in 4 years of marriage that had slowly transformed from hopeful to horrifying. The mining town of Terlingua, nestled in the shadow of the Chizos Mountains, had been booming with mercury mining, bringing wealth to some and desperation to others. Harold had been charming, once handsome even, but the drink had changed him, or perhaps merely revealed what had been there all along. Violet's fingers trembled as she tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear. Through the small window, she could see the vast Texas landscape stretching toward the horizon, its beauty a cruel contrast to the ugliness of her daily life. Freedom seemed as distant as those faraway mountains, shimmering like a mirage in the desert heat. "Violet," Harold's voice boomed from downstairs. "Get down here and fix my supper." She stood quickly, smoothed her simple cotton dress, and took a deep breath. Another day of walking on eggshells was about to begin. The small general store in Terlingua served as the heart of the community. It was where news was exchanged, gossip shared, and supplies purchased for the scattered ranches and homesteads that dotted the harsh landscape. Daniel Tucker had just ridden into town after 3 weeks of driving cattle from his modest ranch, 15 miles outside of town. At 30 years old, he had built a reputation as a fair man who worked hard and minded his own business. He tied his chestnut mare to the hitching post and adjusted his worn leather hat before stepping into the store. The bell above the door jingled, announcing his arrival. "Well, look what the desert blew in," called Samuel Green, the store proprietor. "Haven't seen you in a spell, Tucker." Daniel nodded, the dust of the trail still clinging to his clothes. "Been busy with the herd. Lost 3 to mountain lions last month. Need to stock up before heading back." As Daniel listed his supplies, the door opened again. He glanced up to see a slender woman enter, her head slightly bowed. What caught his attention wasn't her simple blue dress or the basket she carried, but the unmistakable bruising around her left eye, poorly concealed by a bonnet pulled low. "Afternoon, Mrs. Warren," Samuel said, his voice softening considerably. "Mr. Green," she responded quietly, placing a list on the counter. "Just the usual supplies, please." Daniel tried not to stare, but something about the woman's quiet dignity struck him. He'd heard whispers about Harold Warren and his temper, especially when the mining money ran short or the cards turned against him. Those rumors suddenly seemed painfully real. Samuel began gathering Violet's items while Daniel pretended to examine a display of tobacco. He watched from the corner of his eye as Violet's trembling fingers counted out coins. "I'm afraid I'm short this month," she whispered. "Could I pay the rest when Harold gets his wages?" Samuel's face showed his discomfort. "Mrs. Warren, your account is all ready, I'll cover it," Daniel heard himself say before he'd even formed the thought. Both Violet and Samuel turned to him in surprise. "That's not necessary, sir," Violet said quickly, a flash of fear crossing her features. "No trouble at all, madam," Daniel replied, stepping forward and placing coins on the counter. "Consider it a kindness between neighbors." "My husband wouldn't approve," she said, her voice barely audible. Daniel nodded slowly. "Then no need to mention it. Just pass the kindness along when you can." Their eyes met briefly, and Daniel saw something in her green gaze, not just fear, but a flicker of what might have been gratitude quickly extinguished. Samuel, sensing the tension, hurriedly finished packing Violet's supplies. She gathered them with murmured thanks and slipped out the door, glancing nervously up and down the street before heading east toward the edge of town. "Don't," Samuel said as the door closed behind her. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Don't what?" "Whatever you're thinking." "Harold Warren is mean as a rattlesnake and twice as dangerous when he's been drinking." Daniel watched through the window as Violet disappeared around a corner. "How long has that been going on?" Samuel sighed, leaning on his counter. "Got worse after the baby died last winter. Fever took the little one. Some say that's when Warren started hitting the bottle harder. Others say he was always that way." He shook his head. "Not our business, Tucker. Men handle their households as they see fit." Daniel's jaw tightened. "There's a difference between handling a household and what's written all over that woman's face." "You planning on telling Warren that?" Samuel asked with a humorless laugh. "Because I'd prefer not to have a shooting in my store." Daniel didn't answer. He paid for his supplies, loaded them onto his mare, and rode slowly out of town. But instead of taking the trail west toward his ranch, he found himself following the road east, keeping a respectful distance behind a woman carrying a heavy basket of supplies. Violet felt the presence of someone behind her before she heard the hoofbeats. Her heart raced as she turned, expecting to see Harold returning early from the mines. Instead, she saw the tall cowboy from the general store, his horse walking at an easy pace. "Mrs. Warren," he called, tipping his hat. "Looks like you've got quite a load there. May I offer you a ride?" "No, thank you," she replied quickly, clutching her basket tighter. "It's not far." Daniel nodded, respecting her refusal, but didn't turn back. "Then perhaps I could just walk alongside for a spell. These roads can be dangerous for a lady alone." "My husband wouldn't like it," she said automatically. "I understand," Daniel replied, but continued to ride slowly beside her. After a few moments of awkward silence, he spoke again. "Name's Daniel Tucker. I have a small ranch west of town." Violet kept walking, eyes forward. "Mr. Tucker, I appreciate your kindness at the store, but you really shouldn't have interfered. It will only make things worse if Harold finds out." Daniel's expression darkened. "Does he hurt you often, Mrs. Warren?" Violet stopped abruptly, her face paling. "That's not a proper question to ask a married woman, sir." "You're right," Daniel said softly. "I apologize." They continued in silence until they reached a small, weathered house at the edge of town. A wire fence enclosed a yard where a few chickens pecked at the hard ground. The place had a neglected look about it, a broken window pane covered with canvas, a sagging porch step. "This is my home," Violet said stiffly. "Thank you for your escort, Mr. Tucker, but please don't follow me again." Daniel dismounted and reached for her basket. "At least let me carry this to your door." She hesitated, then released her grip on the basket. As Daniel took it, their fingers brushed momentarily, and he saw her flinch at even that slight contact. "Mrs. Warren," he said quietly as they walked the short path to her door. "I don't mean to presume, but if you ever need help—" "I don't," she interrupted, her voice suddenly fierce despite its softness. "I made my choice when I married Harold. For better or worse, remember." Daniel set the basket down on the porch. "Some vows weren't meant to cover certain kinds of worse, madam." Violet's eyes flashed with something anger, fear, or perhaps a distant hope before she looked away. "Good day, Mr. Tucker." Daniel watched her disappear inside the house before mounting his horse again. As he rode toward his ranch, the image of Violet Warren's bruised face stayed with him, along with the quiet dignity in her voice when she had refused his help. That night, as Violet prepared dinner, she heard Harold's heavy footsteps on the porch. The door banged open, and she knew immediately from the stumbling gait that he'd been drinking at the saloon before coming home. "Something smells good," he said, his words slightly slurred as he threw his hat onto a hook by the door. "Just a beef stew," Violet replied, keeping her voice even. "It'll be ready shortly." Harold came up behind her and placed his hands on her shoulders. Once, years ago, such a touch might have been loving. Now it made her skin crawl with dread. "Heard you were talking to some cowboy in town today," he said, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. Violet's heart pounded. "He was just being polite, Harold, nothing more." His grip tightened. "Samuel tells a different story, says he paid for part of our groceries." "I was short on money," she whispered. "He was just being kind." Harold spun her around, his face inches from hers, breath reeking of whiskey. "No man does that without wanting something in return." "You giving him ideas, Violet?" "No, Harold." I swear the back of his hand connected with her cheek before she could finish, sending her stumbling against the stove. A pot of boiling water teetered dangerously before she steadied it. "I won't have my wife making me look like a fool who can't provide," Harold growled. "You stay away from that Tucker fellow, you hear me?" Violet nodded, tasting blood where her lip had split. "I hear you." Later that night, after Harold had fallen into a drunken sleep, Violet stood at her bedroom window looking out at the vast Texas sky. The stars seemed impossibly bright over the desert landscape. Somewhere out there was Daniel Tucker's ranch, somewhere that felt like another world entirely. She touched her swollen lip gently. Why had that stranger shown her kindness? And why had it made her feel something she hadn't felt in years, a dangerous flicker of hope? 3 days passed before Daniel returned to town. He tried to focus on ranch work, mending fences, tending to his small herd, repairing the roof of his modest home, but his thoughts kept returning to Violet Warren. When he finally rode back to Terlingua, he told himself it was just for supplies. The town was busier than usual. A stagecoach had arrived, bringing mail and passengers. Daniel tied his horse outside the saloon and stepped inside, scanning the room. Several miners sat at tables playing cards while others stood at the bar. In the corner, Daniel spotted Harold Warren, deep in a poker game, an almost empty whiskey bottle at his elbow. Daniel ordered a beer and found a spot where he could observe without being obvious. Warren was losing badly, judging by his reddening face and the few coins left in front of him. When the other players showed their hands, Harold slammed his fist on the table. "You're cheating," he accused the man across from him, a traveler Daniel didn't recognize. "Watch your mouth," the stranger warned. "I won fair and square." Harold stood unsteadily, reaching for the gun at his hip. Before he could draw, the bartender intervened. "Take it outside or take it nowhere, Warren," he ordered. "I just got these floors cleaned." Harold glared at the stranger but seemed to think better of drawing his weapon. Instead, he gathered his few remaining coins and staggered toward the bar. "Another bottle," he demanded, slapping coins down. "You've had enough, Warren," the bartender said firmly. "Go home to your wife." Harold's face darkened. "Don't tell me what to do in my own town, Phillips." "Your wife was looking for you earlier," the bartender continued, ignoring the threat in Harold's voice. "Said something about needing money for the doctor." "Doctor?" Harold spat. "What does she need a doctor for?" The bartender shrugged. "Didn't say, just that it was urgent." Harold cursed and stormed out of the saloon. Daniel waited a few moments, then followed, keeping a discreet distance. He watched as Harold made his way unsteadily through town, heading toward his home. Daniel was about to turn back when he noticed Violet emerging from the doctor's small office across the street. She looked pale and was moving carefully, one arm wrapped protectively around her midsection. She froze when she saw Harold approaching from the other direction. Even from a distance, Daniel could see the confrontation unfold. Harold grabbing Violet's arm, shouting something in her face. Violet shrinking away, her response too quiet to hear. Then Harold dragging her roughly down the street toward their home, Violet stumbling to keep up. Daniel's hands clenched into fists. Every instinct told him to intervene, but Samuel's warning echoed in his mind. Getting involved could make things worse for Violet. Instead, he approached the doctor's office and knocked on the door. Dr. James Wilson, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, answered. "Can I help you, Mr. Tucker, Mrs. Warren?" Daniel said without preamble. "Is she all right?" The doctor's expression grew guarded. "I can't discuss my patients, as you know." "I understand," Daniel said, "but I'm concerned." Her husband just dragged her home in a state that didn't look friendly. Dr. Wilson sighed, removing his spectacles and rubbing the bridge of his nose. "What I can tell you, as a general observation, is that a woman who suffers repeated injuries from falling or accidents is rarely experiencing accidents at all." "And is there nothing to be done?" Daniel asked, frustration evident in his voice. The doctor gave him a long look. "The law gives a man considerable latitude in how he manages his household, Mr. Tucker. Unless Mrs. Warren herself seeks help, there's little anyone can do." He paused. "However, I've told her my door is always open, day or night." Daniel nodded grimly. "Thank you, doctor." As he walked back toward his horse, Daniel's mind raced with conflicted thoughts. Interfering between a man and his wife was dangerous business, not just with the law, but with community standards. And yet, the thought of Violet Warren suffering at the hands of her drunken husband made his blood boil. He mounted his horse and rode slowly past the Warren house on his way out of town. The shouting from within was loud enough to be heard from the street. Violet pressed herself against the wall, arms wrapped protectively around her bruised ribs as Harold raged through the house. "What were you doing at the doctor's?" he demanded, knocking a chair over. "Telling tales about me." "I was in pain," Violet whispered. "My ribs after you pushed me down the stairs. You fell," Harold shouted. "Don't you dare say otherwise." "I fell," Violet repeated mechanically. Harold grabbed her chin, forcing her to look at him. "And what did the good doctor say about your fall?" "That I should rest," she replied, her voice trembling. "And that I'm with child." Harold released her abruptly, stepping back. "What? I'm going to have a baby," Violet said, one hand moving instinctively to her still flat stomach. "Our baby." For a moment Harold seemed stunned into silence. Then, unexpectedly, a smile spread across his face. "A baby," he repeated. "A son this time. It has to be a son." Violet nodded, relief washing over her as his anger seemed to dissipate. "Yes, Harold." He pulled her roughly into an embrace that made her wince with pain. "We'll do better this time," he promised. "This one will live." Later, as Harold snored beside her in bed, Violet lay awake staring at the ceiling. A baby. Another innocent life to protect. The thought filled her with both joy and terror. After losing their first child the previous winter, a daughter who had lived barely 3 months, Violet had secretly been relieved not to be pregnant again. How could she bring a child into this house of fear and violence? And yet, the tiny life growing inside her had already changed something. For the first time in years, Violet allowed herself to consider a different future. Not just enduring, but escaping. Going somewhere, anywhere away from Harold's unpredictable rages and cruel hands. But where could she go? A pregnant woman alone had few options in this world. No family to turn to, no skills to earn her keep. And Harold would surely come after her. The thought made her shudder. As if sensing her distress, the baby fluttered inside her too early for a true kick, but a reminder of its presence nonetheless. Violet placed a hand over her stomach and made a silent promise. Somehow, she would find a way out. For this child, she would be braver than she'd ever been. Spring turned to summer, and the Texas heat grew oppressive. Daniel Tucker found reasons to visit Terlingua more frequently than his ranch business required. Sometimes he caught glimpses of Violet at the general store, hanging laundry behind her house, or walking to church on Sundays. Her pregnancy was becoming visible now, a small but definite roundness to her previously slender frame. Harold's behavior had improved somewhat, according to town gossip. The impending arrival of a child seemed to have tempered his worst impulses, though Daniel noticed Violet still moved carefully, as if in constant pain. It was on a scorching July afternoon that Daniel finally had a chance to speak with her again. He had just finished loading supplies into his wagon when he saw Violet emerge from the dressmaker's shop. She looked flushed in the heat, and when she paused to rest in the shade of the awning, Daniel approached. "Mrs. Warren," he said, tipping his hat, "may I help you with those packages?" Violet started at his voice, her eyes darting up and down the street before answering. "Mr. Tucker, Harold isn't in town today. He's at the mine." Daniel understood her meaning. It was safe to talk. "All the more reason you shouldn't be carrying parcels in your condition. May I?" After a moment's hesitation, she nodded, allowing him to take the wrapped bundle of fabric from her arms. "Thank you," she said quietly. "It's just some material for baby clothes." They began walking slowly toward her house, maintaining a respectable distance between them. "How are you feeling?" Daniel asked. "Better," Violet replied, though the shadows under her eyes suggested otherwise. "The baby moves a lot now, and your husband, is he pleased about the baby?" Violet's pace faltered slightly. "Yes, he's certain it will be a son this time. He's been kinder mostly." Daniel noted the qualifier. "Mostly," she didn't answer directly. "Mr. Tucker, why do you keep watching out for me? We barely know each other." Daniel considered his answer carefully. "Where I come from, Mrs. Warren, men protect women and children. It's as simple as that." "I have a husband to protect me," she said, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Does he?" Daniel asked gently. Violet stopped walking, her hand moving protectively to her swollen belly. "Mr. Tucker, I appreciate your concern, but you don't understand my situation." "Then help me understand," he said. "Because from where I stand, it seems like you're trapped in a cage with a wild animal." Tears sprang to Violet's eyes. "He wasn't always this way," she whispered. "When we first married, he was kind, even gentle. Then the mining work became scarce and he started drinking more after we lost our daughter." She trailed off, blinking rapidly. "I'm sorry about your child," Daniel said softly. "Lily," Violet said. Her name was Lily. She was so small. She took a deep breath. "After she died, something in Harold broke, or maybe it was already broken and I just hadn't seen it." They had reached her house now. Daniel handed back the package, their fingers brushing briefly. "Mrs. Warren, Violet," he said, lowering his voice. "If you ever need to leave, I have a place you could go. A small cabin on my property where my ranch hand used to stay before he moved on. It's simple but clean." Violet's eyes widened in alarm. "I couldn't just know it's there," Daniel continued. "No obligations, no expectations. Just a safe place if you need it." "Why would you do that for me?" she asked, genuinely puzzled. Daniel considered several responses before settling on the simplest truth. "Because everyone deserves to feel safe in their own home." Violet looked down at her hands, twisted together over her growing belly. "Thank you," she whispered. "But I made vows." "So did he," Daniel replied. "To love and cherish. Those vows matter too." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both tense. Harold Warren rounded the corner on his horse, returning from the mine earlier than expected. "Get inside," Daniel said quietly. "I'll handle this." Violet hurried up the steps to her porch, disappearing inside just as Harold reined in his horse. "Tucker," Harold called, dismounting. "What business do you have at my house?" Daniel kept his posture relaxed, though every muscle was tense. "Just passing by, Warren. Saw your wife struggling with packages in this heat and offered to help her home." Harold's eyes narrowed. "Mighty neighborly of you." "Just common courtesy," Daniel replied evenly. Harold stepped closer, whiskey evident on his breath despite the early hour. "I've noticed you in town a lot lately. Always seem to be around when my wife is." "Coincidence," Daniel said. "Terlingua isn't that big." "Let me make something clear," Harold said, lowering his voice. "Violet is my wife. Whatever ideas you have about her, get rid of them." Daniel held his gaze steadily. "I have no designs on your wife, Warren, but I do believe in treating women with respect." Harold's hand drifted to his gun. "Is that a criticism of how I treat my wife, Cowboy?" "Take it however you want," Daniel replied, not backing down. "But think carefully before you draw that gun. I'm faster than I look." The tension stretched between them for several long moments before Harold laughed humorlessly. "Go back to your ranch, Tucker, and stay away from Violet." Daniel nodded curtly and walked to his wagon. As he climbed up and took the reins, he glanced back at the house. Through the window, he caught a glimpse of Violet watching, one hand pressed against the glass. The confrontation with Harold Warren haunted Daniel for days afterward. He'd seen the barely controlled rage in the man's eyes, the possessive way he spoke about Violet. It confirmed everything Daniel had suspected, but it also made him worry that his interference might make things worse for her. For 2 weeks, Daniel stayed away from Terlingua, focusing on his ranch and the summer cattle drive preparations. But on a stormy August night, a pounding at his door roused him from sleep. Lightning illuminated the rain-soaked figure on his porch, Samuel Green from the general store, looking grave. "What's happened?" Daniel asked, ushering the older man inside. "It's Warren," Samuel said, removing his dripping hat. "He's been on a 3-day bender. Lost everything at cards and started accusing folks of cheating." "What's that got to do with me?" Daniel asked, though he already knew. Samuel's expression was grim. "He's convinced you've been sneaking around with Violet, been ranting about it all over town. Tonight he went home drunk as a skunk and meaner than a wounded bear." Daniel felt his blood run cold. "And Violet, Doc Wilson was called to their place an hour ago," Samuel said. "I don't know details, but it didn't sound good. The sheriff's locked Warren up for the night to cool off, but he'll be out by morning." Daniel was already pulling on his boots. "I need to make sure she's all right." Samuel grabbed his arm. "Think, Tucker, you showing up will only confirm Warren's suspicions." "I don't care about his suspicions," Daniel replied, shrugging off the older man's grip. "I care about a woman who might be hurt and scared." The rain was still falling heavily as Daniel rode into town, his coat providing little protection against the downpour. Lights burned in the doctor's office despite the late hour. He tied his horse and knocked urgently. Dr. Wilson opened the door, unsurprised to see him. "I wondered when you'd turn up," he said, stepping aside to let Daniel enter. "How is she?" Daniel asked, removing his hat and shaking water from it. The doctor's expression was grave. "Alive, which is something of a miracle considering what that monster did to her. 3 broken ribs, extensive bruising, a concussion." He paused. "And she's lost the baby." Daniel felt a wave of nausea. "My God. She's sleeping now," Dr. Wilson continued. "I gave her laudanum for the pain." He fixed Daniel with a hard stare. "Tucker, this can't continue. Next time he'll kill her." "There won't be a next time," Daniel said firmly. "I'm taking her away from here tonight." The doctor raised an eyebrow. "And if she doesn't want to go, then I'll respect her wishes," Daniel replied. but she needs to know she has a choice. Dr. Wilson nodded slowly. She's in the back room. Be gentle, she's been through hell tonight. Daniel approached the small examination room quietly. Violet lay on a narrow bed, her face so pale it almost matched the white pillowcase beneath her head. Purple bruises bloomed across her cheekbone and around her throat in the unmistakable pattern of fingerprints. Her right arm was splinted and bandaged. As if sensing his presence, her eyes fluttered open. When she saw him, tears immediately welled up. "He killed our baby," she whispered, her voice raw. "He was so angry, said it probably wasn't even his." Daniel knelt beside the bed, careful not to touch her. "I'm so sorry, Violet." She turned her face away. "I should have left months ago. I knew what he was, but I thought the baby would change him." "This isn't your fault," Daniel said firmly. "When he's released tomorrow, he'll come for me," she continued, fear evident in her voice. "And this time he'll finish what he started." "Not if you're not here," Daniel replied. "Violet, let me take you away from Terlingua. You can stay at my ranch until you're recovered, then go wherever you want, San Antonio, El Paso, even back east." She looked at him with confusion. "Why would you do that for me?" Daniel hesitated, then spoke from his heart. "Because in the months I've known you, I've seen your courage and your kindness. Because no one deserves what's happened to you, and because—" He paused, uncertain whether to continue. "Because," she prompted softly. "Because I care what happens to you," he finished simply. "More than I should, perhaps." Violet was silent for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Finally, she whispered, "If I go with you, Harold will come looking. He might hurt you too." "Let me worry about that," Daniel said. "The question is, are you ready to leave?" Tears spilled down Violet's cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "God help me, yes." The journey to Daniel's ranch was slow and painful for Violet. Every jolt of the wagon sent spasms of pain through her injured body. Dawn was breaking by the time they arrived at the small but well-maintained property nestled in a sheltered valley with a creek running through it. The main house was modest, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a sitting area but solidly built. Beyond it stood a barn, corrals, and a small cabin about 50 yards from the main house. "That's where you'll stay," Daniel explained, pointing to the cabin. "I'll be in the main house if you need anything, but you'll have your privacy." With gentle hands, he helped Violet down from the wagon and supported her as they walked to the cabin. Inside was simple but comfortable: a bed with clean linens, a small table with 2 chairs, a wood stove, and a rocking chair by the single window. "It's not much," Daniel said apologetically. "It's perfect," Violet replied, tears in her eyes. "I haven't felt safe in so long." Daniel helped her settle on the bed, arranging pillows to support her injured ribs. "I've got some broth simmering in my kitchen. I'll bring it over once you've rested." Violet caught his hand as he turned to leave. "Mr. Tucker, Daniel, thank you," he smiled gently. "Rest now. You're safe here." As promised, Daniel returned later with a tray of hot broth, fresh bread, and tea. He found Violet awake, sitting up against the pillows, staring out the window at the landscape. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said, setting the tray across her lap. "I've never seen such open space," she admitted. "In Terlingua, I felt trapped by the mountains. Here, it feels like you could breathe forever." Daniel sat in the chair beside the bed. "My father claimed this land when I was just a boy, said a man could think clearly out here with nothing between him and the horizon." Violet sipped the broth carefully. "Will you tell me about your family?" Daniel smiled, grateful for the ordinary conversation. "Not much to tell. My father was a Texas Ranger before settling here, taught me everything I know about ranching and horses. My mother died when I was 14, fever took her. Pa followed 5 years ago." "I'm sorry," Violet said. Were you very lonely after they were gone? Daniel considered the question. I suppose I was, though I didn't think of it that way at the time. Just kept working, building what Pa started. He glanced around the cabin. Never really thought about how quiet it was until now. And you never married? Violet asked, then blushed. Forgive me, that's too personal. No, it's a fair question, Daniel replied. There was a girl once, back when I was 20. Emily Carter. Her father owned the next property over. We had an understanding, or so I thought. But when a banker from Austin came courting with proper city manners and a fat wallet, she chose differently. He shrugged. Can't say I blame her. Ranching's a hard life for a woman. Violet's expression grew thoughtful. I don't think it's the hardness of the life that matters. It's who you're sharing it with. Their eyes met briefly before Violet looked away, suddenly self-conscious. What about you? Daniel asked. How did you come to marry Warren? Violet's hands tightened around her teacup. I was 19 and working as a schoolteacher in a small town near San Antonio. Harold came through with a mining company, so handsome in his fine clothes. Said he was going to make his fortune in the mercury mines. She smiled sadly. He courted me properly, brought flowers, spoke sweetly to my parents. When he asked me to marry him and move to Terlingua, it seemed romantic. An adventure. When did things change? Daniel asked gently. Gradually, then suddenly, Violet replied. The first time he hit me, it was after a night of heavy drinking. He cried afterward, begged forgiveness, swore it would never happen again. She closed her eyes briefly. I believed him, and when it happened again, I made excuses. Then I got pregnant with Lily, and I thought surely now he would change. Daniel's heart ached for her. But he didn't. No, she whispered. If anything, he got worse. Blamed me when the baby cried, when dinner wasn't perfect, when the house wasn't clean enough, after Lily died. She trailed off, tears filling her eyes. Daniel resisted the urge to take her hand, respecting the distance she needed. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. No, I need to, Violet said firmly. I've kept silent too long. She took a deep breath. After Lily died, something in Harold broke completely. He drank constantly, gambled away what little money we had, and when he was angry, which was most of the time, he used his fists. She touched her injured ribs gently. But I stayed, because I had nowhere else to go. Because I thought marriage was forever, no matter what, because I was afraid. And now, Daniel asked softly. Now I'm still afraid, she admitted, but I'm more afraid of going back than of whatever the future holds. Daniel nodded, understanding completely. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be soon enough to figure out next steps. As he took the empty tray and turned to leave, Violet spoke again. Daniel, do you think he'll come looking for me? Daniel paused at the door, not wanting to frighten her but unwilling to lie. Yes. But he won't find you easily, and by the time he does, if he does, you'll be stronger. And you'll be in danger because of me, she said, concern evident in her voice. Daniel smiled reassuringly. I can take care of myself, Violet. Don't worry about me. But as he walked back to the main house, Daniel knew Harold Warren wouldn't let his wife go without a fight. The man's pride would demand satisfaction. And that meant Daniel needed to be prepared for trouble. The next morning, Daniel rode into the small settlement of Presidio, 20 miles south of his ranch. Unlike Terlingua, this town had little connection to the mining operations, which made it safer for Violet's whereabouts to remain unknown. At the general store, he purchased supplies a convalescing woman might need: additional blankets, a few simple dresses in what he guessed to be Violet's size, toiletries, and books to pass the time. The storekeeper's wife helped him select appropriate items, assuming they were for a sister or cousin. His next stop was the telegraph office, where he sent a message to an old friend from his father's ranger days, now serving as a sheriff in El Paso. The telegram was brief, but clear. Information needed about legal options for abused wife. Before heading back, Daniel visited the local doctor, an elderly man named Esteban Ramirez who had treated the Tucker family for years. "It's been too long, Daniel," Dr. Ramirez said warmly, inviting him into his office. "What brings you here today?" Daniel explained Violet's situation in careful terms, describing her injuries and asking for advice on her care. The doctor listened intently, his expression grave. "The physical wounds will heal with time and rest," he said, "but the wounds to her spirit, those will take longer. She will need patience, understanding." "And if her husband comes looking for her?" Daniel asked. Dr. Ramirez's eyes hardened. "Men who beat their wives are cowards at heart. Stand firm against him and he may back down." He paused. "But be careful, my friend. Such men are also dangerous when cornered." Daniel nodded. "I'll be prepared." "And what of your feelings for this woman?" the doctor asked perceptively. Daniel started to protest, but Dr. Ramirez held up a hand. "I've known you since you were a boy, Daniel. I see the concern in your eyes. It goes beyond simple kindness." "Whatever I feel doesn't matter," Daniel replied. "She's been through hell. The last thing she needs is another man making demands on her." The doctor smiled approvingly. "You're a good man, Daniel Tucker. Your father would be proud." He gathered some medicines from his cabinet laudanum for pain, salves for bruising, and tonics to restore strength. "Give her these, with my compliments, and bring her to see me when she's strong enough to travel." Back at the ranch, Daniel found Violet sitting on the cabin's small porch, wrapped in a blanket despite the summer heat. Her face brightened when she saw him approach. "I was beginning to worry," she admitted as he dismounted. "Just went to Presidio for supplies," he explained, retrieving packages from his saddlebags. "Thought you might need some things." Violet looked surprised as he handed her the parcels. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said simply. "How are you feeling today?" "Sore," she admitted. "But better being here." She opened one package to find a simple blue dress. "Oh, Daniel, it's lovely." "The storekeeper's wife helped pick things out," he said, suddenly embarrassed. "I wasn't sure of your size or what you might like." Violet's eyes filled with tears. "It's been so long since anyone thought about what I might like." She touched the fabric reverently. "Thank you." Daniel shifted awkwardly, unused to such gratitude. "Well, I should see to the horses. Supper in an hour," she nodded, still examining her new possessions with wonder. As the days passed, a routine developed between them. Daniel would bring breakfast to the cabin each morning before tending to his ranch work. Violet, growing stronger, began taking short walks around the property, venturing a little farther each day. In the evenings, they would share a simple meal, sometimes at the cabin, sometimes at the main house. They talked easily, learning each other's stories. Daniel spoke of his dreams for the ranch, the struggles and triumphs of the past years. Violet shared memories of her childhood in San Antonio, her brief teaching career, her love of books. Neither mentioned Harold Warren, though his presence hovered between them like a shadow. Daniel knew that sooner or later they would have to confront the reality of her situation. But for now, he was content to see color returning to Violet's cheeks, to hear her laugh occasionally at some small jest. 2 weeks after her arrival, a response came from the sheriff in El Paso. Daniel read it privately before bringing it to Violet's attention. "I've been making inquiries," he explained as they sat on the cabin porch that evening, watching the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. "About your options." Violet tensed visibly. "What did you find out?" "Divorce is possible," he said gently, "on grounds of cruelty. But it would require you to testify in court to make public what he did to you." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking fragile again. I don't know if I can do that. There's another option, Daniel continued. You could simply disappear, start fresh somewhere far from Texas. California, perhaps, or up north. Alone, Violet whispered, and the fear in her voice was palpable. Not necessarily, Daniel replied carefully. I have friends in several places who could help you get settled, find work. Violet was silent for a long moment, watching the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky. And what about you, Daniel? Where do you fit in these plans you're making for me? Daniel's heart beat faster at the directness of her question. That depends on what you want, Violet. I won't pretend I haven't grown to care for you these past weeks, but I also know you've been hurt terribly by a man who claimed to love you. The last thing I want is to press unwanted attentions on you. She turned to face him, her green eyes searching his. Your attentions wouldn't be unwanted, she said softly. But I'm still married, Daniel, still bound by vows, no matter how thoroughly Harold broke his. I understand, Daniel said, though the admission had sent a wave of hope through him. There's no rush to decide anything. You're safe here for as long as you need. Violet reached out hesitantly and placed her hand over his. It was the first time she had initiated physical contact between them, and the simple gesture felt momentous. Thank you for being patient, she whispered. For giving me time to find myself again. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell completely, the vast canopy of stars spreading above them in the clear Texas night. The peace of that evening was shattered 3 days later when Daniel's ranch hand, Miguel, rode in at a gallop. Riders coming, he reported breathlessly. 3 men heavily armed. One matches the description of Senor Warren. Daniel had been expecting this moment, but the reality of it still sent adrenaline coursing through his body. How far out? Maybe 20 minutes, Miguel replied. They stopped at the creek to water their horses. Daniel nodded grimly. Get Violet to the storm cellar behind the house. Then take up position in the barn with the rifle. Don't shoot unless I signal. Miguel nodded and hurried toward the cabin while Daniel retrieved his Colt from the gun cabinet. He had just stepped onto the porch when Violet came running toward him, Miguel following. He's found me, she gasped, fear evident in every line of her body. It'll be all right, Daniel assured her, though he wasn't certain of that at all. Go with Miguel to the storm cellar. Stay there until I come for you. Violet gripped his arm. Daniel, please don't confront him. He's dangerous when he's angry. I'll be careful, he promised. Now go quickly. Once Violet was safely hidden, Daniel walked calmly to the center of the yard and waited. Soon enough, 3 riders appeared on the ridge overlooking the ranch. They descended slowly, Harold Warren in the lead, flanked by 2 rough-looking men Daniel recognized as regulars from the Terlingua saloon. That's far enough, Daniel called when they were 30 yards out. The trio reined in their horses. Harold's face was twisted with rage and what looked like several days' worth of drinking. Where's my wife, Tucker? He demanded. Not here, Daniel replied evenly. Liar, Harold spat. I know you took her. The doctor in Terlingua couldn't keep his mouth shut when I put a gun to his head. Daniel felt a chill at the threat to Dr. Wilson but kept his expression neutral. Whatever happened between you and the doctor is your business, but Violet isn't here. Harold dismounted, swaying slightly. His companions remained on horseback, hands resting near their holstered weapons. Search the house, Harold ordered one of his men who started to dismount. Stay on your horse, Daniel warned, his hand moving to his holstered Colt. This is private property. You're not welcome here. The man hesitated, looking to Harold for guidance. He can't shoot all 3 of us, Harold said with a sneer. Maybe not, came Miguel's voice from the barn doorway where he stood with a rifle raised. But between the 2 of us, we can make sure you're the first to fall, Senor Warren. A tense silence fell over the yard. Harold's eyes darted between Daniel and Miguel, calculating his odds. "This doesn't concern your Mexican," he said finally. "This is between you and me, Tucker, man to man." "There's nothing manly about beating a woman," Daniel replied coldly. "Especially one carrying your child." Harold's face darkened. "That bitch lost my son." "Because you nearly beat her to death," Daniel shot back, his composure slipping for the first time. "She's my wife," Harold growled. "Mine to do with as I please, the law's on my side." "Not anymore," came Violet's voice. Daniel turned in alarm to see her standing on the porch of the main house, Dr. Wilson's telegram clutched in her hand. She had evidently found the document in the house while seeking the storm cellar. "Violet, get back inside," Daniel urged. She ignored him, her gaze fixed on Harold. Though her body trembled visibly, her voice was steady. "The sheriff in El Paso has granted me protection," she said, holding up the telegram, "and a hearing for divorce on grounds of cruelty." Harold laughed harshly. "You think a piece of paper will stop me from taking what's mine?" "I'm not yours anymore," Violet replied with quiet dignity. "I should never have been. A wife isn't property, Harold. She's a partner." "You ungrateful whore," Harold snarled, taking a step toward the house. Daniel moved quickly, positioning himself between Harold and the porch. "That's close enough, Warren." Harold's hand moved to his gun. "Get out of my way, Tucker. I'm taking her home." "No," Daniel said simply. "She's not going anywhere with you." The standoff stretched for several heartbeats. Then, with a roar of rage, Harold drew his pistol. Daniel was faster. His Colt cleared its holster in a smooth motion, and he fired once. The bullet struck Harold in the shoulder of his gun arm, causing him to drop his weapon and stumble backward with a howl of pain. His two companions immediately raised their hands, wanting no part of a gunfight they hadn't anticipated. "Get him out of here," Daniel ordered them, his gun still trained on Harold, who was clutching his bleeding shoulder. "Take him to Dr. Ramirez in Presidio. And tell him that if he ever comes near Violet again, I won't aim for the shoulder." The men nodded nervously, helping Harold onto his horse. He glared at Violet with pure hatred. "This isn't over," he growled. "Yes, it is," she replied, walking down the porch steps to stand beside Daniel. "Goodbye, Harold." They watched as the three men rode away, Harold slumped in his saddle. Only when they had disappeared over the ridge did Daniel holster his weapon. "You were supposed to stay hidden," he said, turning to Violet with concern. "I couldn't let you face him alone," she replied. "Not when it was my fight." Daniel noticed she was still trembling and gently led her to the porch steps to sit down. "Are you all right?" Violet took several deep breaths before answering. "Yes." "No," she gave a shaky laugh. "I don't know. I've been terrified of that man for so long, and now—" "Now," Daniel prompted softly. "Now I feel free," she whispered as if testing the word. "Like I can breathe again." Miguel approached, rifle still in hand. "Should I follow them, Patron? Make sure they leave," Daniel nodded. "Keep your distance. Just make sure they're headed for Presidio, not doubling back." As Miguel rode out, Daniel sat beside Violet on the steps. "Was it true what you said about the sheriff granting protection?" She looked down at the telegram still clutched in her hand. "No. I found this in your desk when I was looking for the storm cellar. I saw it mention divorce proceedings but hadn't read the details." She looked up at him apologetically. "I'm sorry for the deception." "Don't be," Daniel replied with a small smile. "It was quick thinking. And it may have saved lives." They sat in silence for a moment, the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly ebbing away. "What happens now?" Violet finally asked. "That depends on you," Daniel said. "The offer still stands to help you relocate, start fresh somewhere else." Violet turned to face him, her expression suddenly vulnerable. "And if I wanted to stay?" Daniel's heart skipped a beat. Here, at the ranch, she nodded slowly. These past weeks have been healing. Despite everything, I've felt more at home here than I ever did in Terlingua. Violet, Daniel said carefully, I need you to be certain. If you stay, people will talk. They'll assume things about us. Let them talk, she replied with surprising firmness. I've lived my life afraid of what others might think, afraid of disappointing my parents, my husband, the town. Where did that get me? She placed her hand tentatively on his. I'm not saying I'm ready for everything, I need time, but I know I feel safe with you, Daniel, respected, valued. Daniel turned his hand to clasp hers gently. Then stay, he said simply, for as long as you need. No expectations, no demands. The smile that bloomed on Violet's face was like sunrise after a long night. Thank you, she whispered. The months that followed brought healing of many kinds. Violet's physical injuries mended completely, leaving only faint scars to remind her of what she had survived. The emotional wounds took longer, but day by day she grew stronger. Daniel kept his promise, making no demands, offering only friendship and support. He built her a small garden beside the cabin where she grew herbs and vegetables, finding peace in the simple act of nurturing life from the earth. In the evenings, they often sat on the porch reading aloud to each other poetry, adventure stories, newspapers from El Paso or San Antonio. Word came from the sheriff that divorce proceedings had begun. Harold Warren, it seemed, had moved on to the silver mines in Nevada after recovering from his wound, abandoning any claim to Violet rather than facing public scrutiny of his behavior. By the time winter settled over the ranch, Violet had moved from the cabin to the second bedroom in the main house. It was a practical decision. The cabin grew too cold as temperatures dropped, but it marked a new level of comfort between them. They developed domestic rhythms that felt natural, unforced. Daniel would rise first to tend the animals, returning to find coffee brewed and breakfast cooking. Violet took over household accounts, revealing a sharp mind for numbers that improved the ranch's financial standing. In the evenings, they played checkers or dominoes by the fire, talking easily about their days. Christmas came, bringing with it a small celebration. Daniel surprised Violet with a proper writing desk for the corner of the sitting room, while she gifted him with a hand-knitted scarf in rich brown wool. I've never had a more peaceful Christmas, she confessed as they sat before the fire that night, mugs of spiced cider in hand. Nor I, Daniel admitted. It's been a lonely time of year since my parents passed. Violet studied his face in the firelight, noting the strength in his features, the kindness in his eyes. Over the months, her feelings for him had deepened beyond gratitude into something she was finally ready to acknowledge. Daniel, she said softly, there's something I've been wanting to tell you. He turned to face her, setting his cider aside. What is it? The divorce papers came last week, she said. It's final. Daniel's expression remained carefully neutral. That's good news. You're truly free now. Yes, she agreed, gathering her courage. Free to make my own choices, free to follow my heart. Their eyes met, and the understanding that passed between them needed no words. Slowly, Daniel reached out to take her hand. Violet, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I've tried to be patient to give you the time you needed, but I can't deny my feelings any longer. I love you. I think I've loved you since that day in the general store when you held your head high despite everything. Tears filled Violet's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. And I love you, Daniel Tucker. You showed me what real love looks like, not possession or control, but respect and kindness. She squeezed his hand. I'm not afraid anymore. Daniel drew her gently into his arms, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but Violet came willingly, lifting her face to his. Their first kiss was tender, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. When they parted, Daniel rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he whispered. "Court you properly, the way you deserve." Violet laughed softly. "Daniel, we've been living under the same roof for months. I think we're past formal courtship." "Even so," he insisted with a smile, "some things are worth taking time with." And so began a new chapter. Though they continued living in the same house, Daniel courted Violet with all the old-fashioned attentions she'd never truly experienced. Wildflower bouquets appeared on her pillow. He took her on picnics by the creek, taught her to ride the gentlest mare in his stable, read poetry under the stars. In turn, Violet blossomed. She began writing again stories and poems she shared only with Daniel at first, then eventually sent to newspapers in San Antonio. To her delight, several were published under her maiden name, Warren having been legally set aside with her divorce. Spring arrived, bringing new life to the ranch and a proposal beneath the blossoming apple tree Daniel's mother had planted decades before. The wedding was small but joyful, attended by Dr. Ramirez, Miguel and his family, and a few trusted neighbors. "Are you happy, Mrs. Tucker?" Daniel asked as they danced alone in their sitting room that evening, the last guests having departed. Violet looked up at her husband, a word that no longer carried fear, but only joy. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she replied honestly. "You waited for me when I didn't even know I needed waiting for." "I would have waited forever," Daniel said simply. "Thank goodness you didn't have to," Violet replied with a smile, rising on tiptoes to kiss him properly. Years passed, bringing challenges and joys in equal measure. The ranch prospered under their joint care. 2 children joined their family, a son named James after Daniel's father, and 3 years later, a daughter they called Lily, honoring the baby Violet had lost. Sometimes, Violet would stand on the porch watching Daniel teach little James to ride, or sit with Lily on the garden bench reading stories, and marvel at how completely her life had transformed. The bruises and fear were distant memories now, replaced by love and security she had once thought impossible. On their 10th wedding anniversary, as they sat on that same porch watching the sunset, Daniel asked the question he'd wondered about for years. "You ever regret it?" Leaving everything behind and starting over, Violet considered the question seriously, as she did all things. "I regret the years I spent afraid," she said finally. "I regret not being brave enough to leave sooner." She turned to him with a smile that still made his heart race. "But I could never regret finding my way here, to you, to this life we've built together." Daniel took her hand, running his thumb over the simple gold band he'd placed there a decade before. "You were always brave, Violet, even when you didn't know it." "We both were," she replied, leaning her head on his shoulder as the last rays of sunlight painted the western sky in shades of promise. "Brave enough to wait for the right time, brave enough to recognize love when it finally came." And as darkness fell around them, the stars appearing one by one in the vast Texas sky, they remained on the porch, 2 people who had found in each other not just safety or comfort, but the profound understanding that true love never demands or hurts, it simply waits, patient and steadfast, until the heart is ready to embrace it fully.